I was 33 years old the weekend my mother-in-law threw my son's crib in the trash. My husband was deployed. I was at drill, 2 hours out of cell range, doing the thing the army pays me to do. When I pulled back onto our street, the first thing I saw was our gray trash bin at the curb with 4 white slats sticking up out of it like ribs. My son's crib. Linda stood in the doorway with primer on her hands and a smile on her face. What she didn't plan for was who would knock on that door an hour later, or what an officer would call me the hour after that. Welcome to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people meet impossible families and answer with quiet steel instead of screaming. If a story ever made you sit up straighter in your own kitchen, you're home here. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe so the next one finds you. Let me back up to the version of me that still thought careful was enough. I joined the army at 18 because the alternative was a trailer in a town already forgetting my name. 11 years later, I had stripes on my sleeve, a clean record, and a 10-week-old son named Noah who smelled like milk and laundry soap. My husband Daniel was 3 months into a deployment overseas. Most nights it was just me and Noah, and the kind of tired that comes from doing everything right and still bracing for the day it isn't enough. My own mother had passed 2 years before. The last thing her hands ever made was a knit blanket the color of wheat. I kept it draped over the side of Noah's crib so a little of her would always be near him. People who don't live this life think soldiering and single parenting is about toughness. It isn't. It's about lists. I had a list for feedings, a list for the sitter, a list taped inside the kitchen cabinet for anyone who might need to step in. I trusted paper more than promises because paper doesn't change its story when it's inconvenient. Then there was Linda. Daniel's mother had decided to dislike me before I ever said a word. At our wedding, she told a cousin I looked sturdy, like that was the kindest thing she could manage. Her line about Noah was soft as a hymn and sharp as an attack. A baby needs roots, not a duffel bag. I used to think it was snobbery. It wasn't, and I won't pretend otherwise because the truth is sadder. Daniel's father had been Army too, gone more years than he was home, and then gone for good. When Linda looked at me, she didn't see her son's wife. She saw the uniform that had taken her husband, walking around with her grandson on its hip. I understood that. But understanding why a person is cruel is not the same as agreeing to be the place they put it. The week before that drill weekend, Linda texted me, all warmth and exclamation points, that she'd love to come stay a few days and meet the baby properly. I told her the schedule was already covered. She said family always finds a way. I didn't sleep well that night and couldn't have told you exactly why. Here is something most civilians don't know. If you're a soldier with a child and no spouse on hand, you are required, not suggested, required to have a family care plan on file. It names exactly who cares for your child when duty calls, and that person has to be vetted and approved in writing. My plan named Dana, the wife of a guy in my unit, a woman I'd trusted through 3 deployments. She had a key, the pediatrician's number, and the same list everyone got. Linda was not on that plan. Linda had never been on that plan, because a plan is a promise you can't take back when you're mad, and I did not trust her promises. I'd also enrolled in the new parent support program. A nurse named Ms. Calloway had a home visit scheduled for that very Saturday afternoon. My binder was on the kitchen counter, tabbed and dated. My unit teased me about the binder. That weekend, it saved everything. Friday night, Linda texted again, "I'll just pop by to see the baby." My stomach turned. I texted Dana immediately, "Do not leave him with anyone but me." She sent back a thumbs up. I told myself I was being dramatic and went to pack my ruck. I was being a lot of things that weekend. Dramatic wasn't one of them. Saturday came gray and early. Before I left, I stood in the nursery with Noah on my shoulder, swaying without deciding to. His crib against the wall, the wheat blanket folded over the rail, the little lamp that hummed. I pressed my face into the warm spot behind his ear and breathed him in. Milk, that blanket, the particular sweetness of a baby who has no idea the world is anything but safe. I kissed his forehead, handed him to Dana, and walked to my truck while my chest did what it always did, that tight pull like a seat belt across the heart. I told myself the hard part was leaving. I was wrong about which part of the day was going to be hard. At the reserve center, I locked my phone at 9:30. The cabinet clicked shut. For 2 hours, I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I'd promised. And for 2 hours, I had no idea. I pieced the rest together later from Dana and from people honest enough to tell me what they saw. Around 10 that morning, Linda and Daniel's sister Brenda pulled into my driveway. When Dana opened the door with Noah on her hip, Linda walked in like she owned the deed. "We're family. We've got him now." Dana said no. Twice, polite the first time, firm the second. She tried to call me, but my phone was in a metal cabinet 40 minutes away. Brenda stepped between Dana and the nursery. Linda kept up that pleasant, immovable pressure that certain women have perfected over decades. Eventually, Dana left, because the only other option was a screaming match in front of a 10-week-old, and she texted me the second she hit a signal at the end of the street. Her last words to me later were the ones that still sit in my chest. As she backed out, she looked through the front window and saw Linda already dragging something heavy toward the door. What Linda did next, she did believing she was saving her grandson. That's the part people find hard to hear. She didn't think of herself as a villain. She thought of herself as a rescuer, and that made her more dangerous than plain meanness ever is. She walked into Noah's nursery and decided it offended her. Too bare, too military. She'd brought a can of primer in her trunk, because of course she had, and she started rolling gray over my son's walls while he napped one room away. By noon, a neighbor named Pat had drifted over, a friend of Linda's from church who liked nothing better than a project with someone else's family at the center of it. Pat pulled out her phone and filmed, narrating in a low, pious voice about poor Daniel and that mother who was never home. Linda stood in the wet paint and declared, "No grandchild of mine sleeps in a supply closet." Then she turned and looked at the crib. She moved Noah out of it and laid him on the guest bed, propped between two pillows in a room reeking of primer, door shut, a space heater ticking 3 feet from his face. Every single thing about that is what a nurse would call an unsafe sleep environment, and what I would call the longest 2 hours of my life that I didn't even know were happening. Then she and Brenda carried the crib outside and shoved it into the gray trash bin at the curb. The white slats wouldn't fit all the way, so they stuck up out of the top. They threw the safe sleep gear in after it. They threw the wheat-colored blanket my mother knit in too, the last thing her hands ever made, balled up and tossed on top like garbage. Pat filmed. Brenda laughed, and Linda, wiping primer off her palms, looked at my son's whole little world jammed into a trash can and said the words I would later hear repeated back to me by a caseworker. "No army brat will ruin my son's house." She was still smiling when the knock came. It was 1:30 on a Saturday, and a visit had been on my calendar for 2 weeks. Ms. Calloway, my new parent support nurse, arriving exactly on schedule. She was a calm woman in her 50s who had seen everything once and most things twice. She didn't need to come inside to start adding it up. A crib in the trash bin at the curb, the smell of primer rolling out the open door. A stranger with paint on her hands telling her there was no soldier here today and she could go. Calloway asked where the baby was. Linda said he was sleeping and it wasn't her concern. Ms. Calloway is a mandated reporter. The law does not give her the option of pretending she didn't see what she saw. She walked back to her car and made the call that started everything. "I want to stop here and tell you something I learned the hard way that day. Do the boring, careful things even when nobody claps. Keep the plan, keep the paperwork." If you've ever been the one who overprepares while people roll their eyes and call you dramatic, this story is for you. Drop a comment, I'd have called too, and let's keep going, because I was still standing in a field. At 11:30, they unlocked the cabinet and handed our phones back. Mine lit up the second it powered on and kept lighting up. Dana's texts stacked one on top of the other, each one worse than the last. They made me leave. "Crystal, I'm so sorry." I tried, then a photo, blurry through a windshield, unmistakable. My trash bin. 4 white slats reaching up out of it. I have been trained to keep my hands steady when everything in me wants to shake. That training is the only reason I didn't drop the phone. The cold, quiet part of my brain started doing what it does best, which is making a list. Panic is a luxury. I filed it away for later. I walked, did not run, to my first sergeant and held up the phone so he could see the photo. His face did something I'd never seen it do. It went to stone. He looked at the picture, then at me, and didn't ask a single question I'd have to answer twice. Thorn, go. He was already reaching for his own phone. I'll make the calls. I had 40 minutes of road between me and my son, and I drove every one of them like the speed limit was a personal insult. Here's the machine I didn't fully understand was already running. When a report of an unsafe child involves a military family, the civilian side and the military side don't work in separate rooms. They talk. Child Protective Services contacts the installation's Family Advocacy Program. Family Advocacy notifies the soldier's commander, law enforcement, medical, and they move as a team because a child's safety is not something anybody is allowed to sit on. I pulled onto our street and there it was, exactly like the photo. I left the truck half in the driveway and went through my own front door. The smell hit me first. Primer, thick enough to taste, every window shut tight. I found Noah on the guest bed between 2 pillows near a space heater. I had him against my chest in under a second. I carried him to the living room, threw the windows open one-handed, killed the heater, and stood in the cold, clean air, feeling his breath against my neck, while my heart finally caught up with my body. Linda came out of the hallway with primer still on her hands and looked at me like I was the intruder. Well, she said, finally decided to act like a mother. I did not raise my voice. I have learned that the quietest thing in the room is usually the one people remember. Step back from him, I said. Now, she stepped back. The flatness of it surprised her more than yelling would have. On my way past the front door, I looked into the trash bin one more time and I saw it. A corner of wheat-colored wool balled up under the slats. My mother's blanket. In the garbage. That was the moment the cold quiet in me turned into something with a spine. The first thing I did was not yell at Linda, which I'm proud of. The first thing I did was put Noah in his car seat and drive him to the clinic, because the only opinion I cared about was a doctor's. They checked him head to toe. He was fine, pink, fussy, hungry, perfect. No harm done. I have thanked God for that sentence more times than I can count, because I know how easily it could have gone another way. While they weighed him, I stood in the corner of the exam room and started writing. Times, names, what Dana saw, what I walked into. I saved her photo in 3 places so it couldn't disappear. It wasn't strategy. It was instinct. The same instinct that keeps a soldier's gear squared away when everything else is chaos. By the time we got home, Linda and Brenda had cleaned up the visible mess, as if a mopped floor could unring a bell. Brenda's text read, "You left." Everyone saw. It told me they thought this was a fight about appearances, about who looked like the better mother on a Saturday afternoon. Then I saw that Pat had posted her little video to the neighborhood page. Comments were already stacking up. I read 3 of them, put the phone face down, and thought very calmly, you have no idea what everyone is about to see. That night, after Noah was finally down in a borrowed bassinet, a neighbor dropped off. I sat at the kitchen table with every light on and my binder open in front of me. The family care plan with Dana's name and the approval stamp and Linda's name nowhere. The new parent support enrollment, the pediatrician records, the schedule, the list taped inside the cabinet. Years of being called too rigid, too careful, told I was treating a baby like a deployment. That night, every careful thing I'd ever done lined up like sandbags against a flood. People think preparation is fear. It isn't. It's the opposite. It's deciding ahead of time that you will not be at anyone's mercy. I found an email I'd half read at the clinic, sent from Calloway's office at 1:48 that afternoon. I opened it on my laptop. It was the actual filed report of what she'd observed at my address, with a timestamp, a case number, and language I'd seen only from the working end of my own job. I sat very still and read it twice. And right there, under my mother's recipe magnets and the hum of the refrigerator, I understood that Linda hadn't just crossed a line in my house. She'd crossed a line on the record. And the record, unlike a promise, doesn't change its story when it's inconvenient.